Okay, our first two honorees have requested that they receive their awards together. How can one possibly do justice to the enormous difference that Tom Brokaw and Dick Ebersol have collectively had on this industry in just a few minutes? Tom Brokaw has journalistically guided our lives and helped us make sense of our complicated world through his outstanding ability to define what mattered most and deliver a compelling story that could be understood by all. Whether conducting the first interview with Mikhail Gorbachev or being the only network anchor to report from Berlin the night the Berlin Wall came down, Tom's trusted voice will forever echo in our minds as we replay the headlines of our lifetime. His versatility has ranged from hosting the Today Show to moderating Meet the Press during the 2008 campaign, to authoring best-selling books, and even being a talented fly fisherman. The world of journalism would not be the same if we didn't have the privilege of having Tom as anchor and managing editor of NBC Nightly News for more than 2 decades. He's won every major award in our business, not to mention the Presidential Medal of Freedom. But perhaps the most important, he won the trust of the public he served through his entire career, and he made us smarter every day of our lives. And then there's Dick Ebersol. We all know that Dick Ebersol transformed sports on television, but did you know that he was the man who hired Lorne Michaels? Together, they conceived and created Saturday Night Live. He was NBC's first vice president under the age of 30. When he headed late-night programming, he even spent some time as senior vice president of NBC News. Dick understood television's power to entertain and inform, but he broke all records when he moved over to sports. He had the ability to connect viewers through a shared experience like no other. Imagine laying claim to having produced 8 of the top 10 most watched television events in U.S. history. As an example, the 2008 Beijing Games had 215 million viewers, and Super Bowl 43 in 2009 had 152 million viewers. It could be said that Dick was breaking world records alongside the athletes with his incredible feats. For example, for the first time in history, back in the 1995-96 season, the World Series, the Super Bowl, the NBA Finals, and the Summer Olympics all were broadcast by the same network. No wonder he's won every industry award imaginable and was considered the most powerful person in sports. He's always been a creative visionary and a business strategist, but he truly understood the degree to which partnership was essential to the equation. Tom Brokaw and Dick Ebersol are the real gold medalists in our industry, but today it is our pleasure to induct them as giants with a big blue bowl.
There was a time when I was a young man in college when I've been given something like that, I would have filled it with a case of beer and then tried to chug the entire thing. I've moved a little bit beyond that. Dick and I want to appear here together because you're looking at 2 of the luckiest guys, not just in this industry, but in the world, in our personal and professional lives. We have had the good fortune of being there at the birth of network television and all of its parts. For my part, I grew up in the wasteland of South Dakota. I say that with great affection because I lived way out on the prairie. I didn't see television until I was 15. And in the fall of 1955, I moved to Yankton, South Dakota. We got that Zenith black and white television set. And magically, every night at 5:30, Chet Huntley and David Brinkley were there to bring the world into our living room. And it was then that the light began to go in my mind about that's what I want to do. I was a political junkie. I was working at a little radio station at the time, and I thought maybe that can be a career. Jump to 1960, and it's election night. The most exciting time in my young life was the election of Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. At 7 o'clock at night, I sat down in my parents' small living room, and I did not move until 8 o'clock the next morning. And at that point, my life was fixed. I want to be one of them at some point. Not ever imagining, of course, that I could get to be the anchorman. I simply wanted to be a political reporter and let someone else pay for me to see the world. And it worked out beyond my wildest expectations. And of course, with all of that comes a certain amount of public recognition. My wife and I left Yankton, South Dakota with everything that we owned in the backseat of a Chevy 2 in 1962. Drove to my first job in Omaha. Then I quickly got a job in Atlanta, and from there to the network in California. And then eventually to the White House, came to New York, where I was taking over the Today Show at the age of 34. Pretty pumped up about all that. But what has always been wonderful about this business is the way your viewership keeps it in perspective for you. I'd been here about 4 days, and I was in Bloomingdale's, and a man began to trail me through the corridors of Bloomingdale's. And I had learned at that point to just nod and say, yes, I'm Tom Brokaw. And he rushed over to me, and he said, you're Tom Brokaw, right? And I said, I am. He said, you used to work in Omaha. I'm from Omaha. And I said, oh, isn't that wonderful? And he looked at me for a moment, and he said, whatever happened to you anyway? Well, what happened to me is I had the good fortune of teaming up with my longtime pal, first the boy genius of broadcasting at NBC, the great producer, and then as our careers intertwined over the years, we found that we had a real yin and yang relationship, that we had shared interests, we had shared views of how stories ought to be put together, and Dick gave me a whole other kind of secondary place in NBC in which I began to do long essays for the Olympic coverage. So Richard, I think it's your turn to come up here and share with them how we have found each other and found our love. We're the two luckiest guys you'll ever see in broadcasting.
Lucky we are. I was thinking, though, Tom, the numbers for your life are staggering. 50 years, the same employer. 54 years, one marriage, one wife. 76 years, one hell of a guy that all of us are so lucky to know. I'm glad he admitted the indiscretions with the beer in the vase and the Dakotas. He almost slipped down that road from my readings of his biographies and hearing these stories through the years, but a great old college professor put him on the right road at the University of South Dakota, and along with Meredith, he turned out to be, in many ways, America's conscience. And I was really lucky. Once we got the rights to so many Olympics, I had this one little dream that I wanted to have a collaboration, and none could be better as a collaborator than Tom. And the idea was to use every Olympics, to end every Olympics, with a meaningful story about where we'd been, so that people at home who I, in my gut, never felt knew enough about most of the places we went to. And some of those stories, some of you may remember, and some weren't at the end of the Olympics. In Vancouver, I asked Tom at the beginning, and in 8 minutes, he reminded every American of something we take for granted, that those people just north of us are our friends like no one else. It's the longest border, peaceful border in the world, and has remained so. They've been there for us in everything. And we ended those same Olympics with this unbelievable piece that Tom did called Operation Yellow Ribbon, which was to tell the story of what the Canadians did for us on 9/11. when suddenly all of our planes, our commercial planes, were in the air, including one of them was Jim Bell's, and how the people of Gander, Newfoundland, opened up their airport, their homes, and for days, thousands of strangers lived there. And we did the same thing again in London because both of us really love World War II. Tom's love affair is known to everyone. Mine's more of a secret, but the idea that so many people today don't know that Britain, many of us in this room know because we're old, but Britain stood against the world all alone. And we spend all this time today castigating our friends in other countries around the world for all the things they don't do for us. We have a guy running for president who likes to do that. But this film about them, about the Brits in that hour of need for the whole world, was one of my proudest accomplishments. And yet, the best thing about all this is that Tom goes on and he still does these pieces. He just has a different executive producer, my friend Jim Bell over here. So I'd like to close by saying that I feel really lucky to the point of forcing me to examine my conscience and wonder whether or not I shouldn't be up here, because this is the guy who really became America's friend and lived in every home in our country for year after year and told them the hard truths, the sweet things about America, and on a little known fact, in his very last telecast, he was the one who had to tell America that they had found the body of our son. And it could not have come from anybody who was a richer or better friend than Tom.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.